Beneath the low winter sky, the air carried the ache of fire that refused to burn clean. Damp wood smoldered, sending up a bitter smoke that clung to the hills like a funeral shroud. Somewhere far off, the iron tongue of bells struck again and again, their notes neither song nor warning, but a dull reminder of power, distant, unseen, unquestionable. Against the pale horizon, the castle rose, not in majesty, but in menace. Its towers stood gray, streaked with rain and lichen, stone as weary as the centuries it had endured. This was no monument to glory. This was a tomb for the living. Within the walls, the air was colder still. The narrow corridors swallowed light, their ceilings dripping with moisture that never dried. Torches flared and sputtered, flames twisting against currents of unseen wind, casting shadows that stretched and shrank like phantoms across walls that remembered every scream. Each stone seemed alive with echoes, cries of betrayal, prayers unanswered, names called into the void only to vanish in silence. Here, the prisoners were not villains carved from black tales. They were pawns, pieces in the ruthless game of inheritance and suspicion. Men were taken not for what they had done, but for who they were. Women were dragged from villages not for guilt, but for bloodlines. Children, too, found themselves bartered, exchanged like coin, their futures mortgaged to the feuds of lords who never dirted their hands with the chains they ordered fastened. Through the rain, a girl was led across the drawbridge. Her cloak clung heavy to her shoulders, rainwater soaking her hair until it plastered against her cheeks. She kept her eyes lowered, though she could feel the stares of the guards, men whose halberds gleamed even in the dim light, men whose lives had hardened into routine obedience. The groan of the portcullis lowering filled her ears, slow and metallic, like the grinding jaw of some monstrous beast sealing its prey inside. In that moment, the world of open sky slipped away from her. She stepped into air that smelled of straw and rust, of mold that no fire could cleanse. The silence was fractured by the coughing of the sick, the whispered prayers of the desperate, the scrape of chains against stone. For the keepers of this place, it was nothing. Their duty was a script rehearsed too many times. Loyalty to crown, loyalty to cross, loyalty to the iron order that demanded flesh as payment for obedience. They did not see people. They saw duty performed. But the walls saw more. The walls listened. Each droplet of water falling from the vaults above struck the stone with a sound like a slow heartbeat. The castle drank sorrow as if it were wine, and it was always thirsty. The girl was shown her cell, a hollow in the stone where straw had rotted into sour clumps. The iron bars were slick with damp. She sank to her knees, her breath catching as the cold gnawed at her bones. Around her, shapes shifted, men wrapped in rags, eyes hollow with hunger, lips moving in muttered fragments of memory. Some no longer spoke words, only sounds. Some stared at nothing, as if the world beyond had already forgotten them. Her fingers brushed against something fragile in the straw. She lifted it, a feather small and white, no larger than her palm. It must have slipped through the barred window above, carried by a bird that had flown too close to a place no living thing should linger. She turned it slowly between her fingers, the softness alien in a world of stone and iron. In that feather lived everything she had lost. Sky, wind, the beating of wings against clouds. She pressed it to her lips, holding it as one holds a relic, a token of a world that would never again be hers. Nights bled into days without difference. The torches smoked, the bells tolled, the chains clanked, and still, the walls drank sorrow. She learned the rhythm of despair, the way silence could stretch so wide it swallowed thought. The others around her faded piece by piece, voices thinning, bodies shrinking, eyes going dim. Yet she clung to the feather, hiding it in the folds of her cloak when the keepers passed. It became her secret covenant with the outside world. Sometimes she dreamt of escape. In her dreams, the barred window broke open into sky, and the feather grew until it lifted her over fields and rivers, carrying her away from stone and sorrow. But she always woke to dripping vaults, to the groan of doors, to the scraping of boots on stone. The castle was more than fortress. It was theater, a stage where suffering was rehearsed, repeated, perfected. Lords whispered of loyalty while prisoners starved. Priests blessed the keepers while innocence wasted away. The feather in her hand was her only contradiction, her only proof that the world beyond still existed. As seasons turned unseen outside, she grew quieter, thinner, paler. Hope itself became a kind of hunger, gnawing at her from within. Yet she could not let go of the feather. She held it when the coughing kept her from sleep. She held it when others were dragged past her cell, never to return. She held it when the silence pressed so heavily upon her that she thought it would crush her lungs. One night, when the torches sputtered and the keeper's footsteps faded, she pressed her forehead against the bars and listened. The feather lay in her palm, light as breath. The wind outside howled, carrying the scent of rain. For the first time in weeks, she closed her eyes not in surrender, but in defiance. She imagined wings cutting through the storm, carrying her name to the world that had forgotten her. The castle's silence deepened, heavy as a shroud, but within it stirred the faintest sound, the whisper of feathers, or perhaps only her heartbeat refusing to die away. And so, the girl disappeared into years of invisibility. She would grow into shadow, into silence, into a name unspoken. Yet within the damp straw, a single feather waited, refusing to rot, refusing to vanish. A symbol not of freedom achieved, but of freedom remembered. The walls pressed in, but beyond them the world still turned. Somewhere, a bird lifted into the gray dawn, wings cutting across the horizon. Somewhere, bells rang not in menace, but in mourning. And somewhere, in the silence of a forgotten cell, a girl's hand closed around the memory of flight. The story of stone and sorrow was not finished. For the same wind that carried the feather would soon carry word of rebellion. And in that rising storm, the walls that drank sorrow would one day bleed. The night is a weight upon the earth. Rain lashes against stone and skin alike, falling in sheets that blur the world into shadows and fire. A procession climbs the sodden slope, torches flaring and sputtering in the storm, their light smearing across helms and chains. Hooves slosh through the mire, each step sinking into the wounded earth as though the valley itself resists this grim ascent. The sound of iron links rattling rises above the storm, the voice of the condemned, bound together in misery, climbing toward the maw of their fate. Above them the fortress waits, perched high, crouched against the night like a wolf's lair. It broods with the silence of stone that has witnessed centuries of hunger, feasts, war, and betrayal. The silhouette cuts jagged teeth against the storm-laden sky. Once, banners flapped from its battlements, and laughter spilled like wine from its halls. Now suspicion has stripped it bare. Its feast tables are overturned, its banners rotted away, its hearths darkened. What remains is a prison, a carcass of joy hollowed into suspicion, each chamber echoing only with the scrape of chains across its stones. Among the captives forced up the slope is a boy of ink and parchment, a scribe. His wrists, chafed raw by the iron biting into them, tremble not with strength but with fear. His crime is treachery, they claim. Words written in a hand not his own. Accusations scrawled upon parchment that carries his name like a curse. He pleads silently, but the storm swallows his voice. The procession drags him forward. At the fortress gate, archways carved with saints loom above him. Once guardians of sanctity, their faces are now washed away by centuries of rain, their eyes hollow pits staring into nothingness. To the scribe, they seem to mourn, to bow their faceless heads in silence as he is thrust beneath their gaze. A torch sputters and the world inside consumes him. The fortress breathes of mold and damp. The air is heavy with the staleness of old stone, of wax melted into puddles upon forgotten floors. Drips fall in a rhythm from the cracks overhead, a patient clock marking the eternity of captivity. The jailer, broad-shouldered and expressionless, strips the boy of what little anchors he clings to, his belt, his penknife, the last fragment of self. Metal clangs upon the table. The scribe's hands, stained with ink from countless nights bent over vellum, flutter helplessly before the iron door slams, swallowing him in darkness. Here time ceases to flow. Days dissolve into cycles of hunger and whispers. The walls weep with the rain pressing in from outside. Candle smoke chokes the air, its flame trembling as though it too fears this place. The boy kneels in the damp straw, whispering fragments of psalms. He remembers them not from parchment now, but from memory, each word carried like a hidden flame in the hollow of his chest. His voice cracks but persists, each syllable a rebellion, each prayer a chain unbroken by iron. Memories haunt him. The library of his youth returns with brutal clarity. Rows of vellum whispering beneath the quill, the scratch of ink shaping eternity. The scent of parchment and oak beams high above. There he believed words were eternal bridges of faith, ladders to God. But here, in this tomb of suspicion, he knows words can be twisted into blades, wielded as accusations sharper than any sword. Knowledge itself has been turned against him. The fortress groans with its own life. Wind squeezes through the arrow slits, carrying the howl of wolves in the valley below. The torchlight in the corridors flickers in narrow windows like the blinking of a predator's eyes. The battlements above bristle with spears and shadows, their teeth bared to a night that offers no mercy. Outside, villagers glance up at this dark hill and whisper of the castle. A place of lords and soldiers, a shelter against the storm. But those within know its truth. It is not protection but burial. It is a tomb where the innocent are entombed alive, where the heartbeat of hope must fight to endure the suffocation of despair. The boy presses his forehead against the cold stones, lips shaping prayers that no one will hear. He imagines his words rising like smoke through the cracks, slipping past iron and mortar, seeping into the storm. He wonders if the saints, their faces eroded yet eternal, still listen. He wonders if heaven itself bends close enough to hear the murmurs of a boy chained in the belly of the earth. Thunder shatters the silence, rolling through the chambers like the drums of a distant army. In its wake comes silence, deep and suffocating. The boy closes his eyes and feels the storm's fury within him. Each flash of lightning through the slit of his cell burns the walls white, etching the saint's faceless gaze into his mind. He recalls words he once copied, words inked in trembling lines. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. He breathes them now, not with the calm of faith but with the desperation of one clinging to the last rope above the abyss. Nights stretch into endlessness. Hunger gnaws, thirst cracks his lips, yet the boy clings to memory, to syllables carved into his soul. Each prayer is both shield and sword, each breath a testimony that the fortress cannot devour the spirit entire. For even as stone entombs him, his voice threads through the dark, thin as spider silk, strong as steel. Above, in the hall where lords once feasted, torches hiss in iron brackets, shadows dancing against banners blackened with mildew. Guards murmur, armor clinking like restless ghosts. They laugh harshly, voices echoing into the chambers below, a cruel reminder of life continuing above the buried. But the boys' prayers sink deeper, threading into the marrow of the fortress, haunting it with the persistence of faith. And so the fortress becomes a paradox. To those who look upon it from the valley, it stands as stone and sovereignty, an emblem of order. To those within, it is a devouring beast, a coffin where air itself feels stolen. Yet in the heart of this beast, a whisper stirs, faint but unyielding. The boys' psalms move like hidden rivers through the cracks of despair, carrying embers that refuse to die. As the storm begins to fade, leaving only the dripping silence of dawn, the fortress exhales. The boy, huddled in darkness, mouths a final prayer before sleep drags him under. His words linger in the damp air, invisible yet indestructible, a rebellion against chains, a testimony against silence. For outside, the world waits, unaware of the boy's whispered defiance. The sun edges against the horizon, pale and uncertain, touching the fortress walls with a light too fragile to break the gloom. Yet within that fragile light lies the promise of another chapter, one where despair will meet its rival, and faith, sharpened by hunger and pain, will burn brighter than the torches that guard the night. A cold dawn bleeds across the horizon, painting the stones of the fortress in pale gold. Yet inside its walls no warmth stirs. The wind carries a thin cry of crows circling above the battlements, their wings slicing against the pale morning. Beneath them, the courtyard lies heavy with silence. Soldiers shift in their armor, the hiss of chainmail louder than any word spoken. And then footsteps. Across the frost-hardened earth she is led, barefoot, her soles raw against the stones. A woman of noble blood, stripped of title, stripped of trust. Her name once rang with honor in banquet halls, whispered by suitors in velvet, spoken by servants with reverence. Now it is spat in corners, muttered in fear, reshaped into a weapon. Accused of witchcraft by rivals whose envy grew like rot in the dark, she walks with her head bowed. The frost clings to her lashes, the dew to her hair. That hair, once combed with oils, woven with ribbons and jewels, now hangs matted, damp with the breath of night. She does not lift her gaze, but the chapel bells toll overhead. They do not ring for her salvation. Their iron tongues proclaim her downfall, each peal a sentence, each echo a judgment. The keep, carved from stone to withstand armies and storms, has become her tomb of dignity. Its arrow slits frame only fragments of the sky, reminders of a freedom denied. The guards do not look her in the eyes. Some murmur as she passes, their breath clouding in the morning chill. Perhaps they pity her. Perhaps they curse her. Perhaps they simply wish the moment gone, so they can return to their posts, to their ale, to their ordinary silence. At her side, a priest walks with his hands folded. His lips move with prayers, yet his eyes gleam with something colder than piety. When she does not speak, he whispers that her silence is proof of guilt. When she does not weep, he calls it the hardness of sorcery. The more she withholds, the more they claim. A woman's quiet, once a mark of grace, becomes the nail in her coffin. She touches the iron ring at her wrist. The shackle is rough, its edge biting into the tender skin, a cruel circle where once silk had rested. In her memory, she still feels the touch of veils, soft as clouds, draped across her shoulders on feast days when torches blazed and wine flowed like rivers. She remembers music, laughter, the hum of voices praising her beauty. That memory feels not like weeks past, but centuries buried beneath ash. Now stone and silence consume her. The dungeon breathes around her with damp air, smelling of moss and rust. The candle placed in her cell flickers weakly, its flame quivering as though fearful of the darkness it holds at bay. Wax drips slowly, drop by drop, a fragile hourglass measuring her endurance. She counts each fall, steady, deliberate, as though by keeping time she can keep herself. Her ritual becomes prayer. Not for freedom, freedom feels a foreign word now, but for remembrance. She fears not the stake, nor the rope, nor the iron. She fears oblivion, that her name will be buried with her bones, her story silenced by jealous tongues. She presses her palm to the damp earth beneath her knees, whispering not for her life, but that her memory might outlast the candle's final breath. Above her cell, the fortress lives as if untouched. Servants hurry with baskets of bread. Fires crackle in kitchens. Banners stir in the wind. To the villagers below, the castle looms as unshakable power, a shield of authority against the chaos of the outside world. They see walls and turrets. They do not see chains. They do not smell damp stone or hear the whimper of those swallowed whole by accusation. Her breath fogs in the cold, rising like a ghost in the candlelight. She closes her eyes and hears the moan of the wind through the cracks in the wall. It comes like a voice, like the earth itself grieving for her. The sound carries her mind beyond stone, beyond shackle, to fields she once walked. Meadows where the grass bent like green oceans, where the sky opened wide and unbroken. She clings to that wind as to a friend. In the silence, she begins to speak, not aloud but within, to her father, who once called her his jewel, to her mother, who braided her hair with patient fingers, to the God who seems absent, yet whom she dares not curse, to the nameless children yet unborn who may one day whisper of her fate. She asks only this: let the truth breathe longer than the lie. The guards pass occasionally, their torches casting momentary stripes of fire across the stones. One pauses at her door, his shadow stretching long across the cell. He does not speak, but she feels the weight of his stare. Does he doubt her guilt? Does he see in her face the sister, the daughter, the wife he once knew? He moves on. His footsteps fade. She remains. The night is colder than the dawn. The candle shrinks lower, its wax pooling like tears. Each drop is a drumbeat. She kneels still, her body trembling, her lips moving in whispers too faint for ears of flesh. Her name, her plea, her prayer. And outside, life does not wait. The bells toll again, summoning the villagers to market, to worship, to gossip. And somewhere among their chatter, her story is already changing. They call her a temptress, a schemer, a handmaiden of the devil. They do not know the woman kneeling in chains whispers only for remembrance, not revenge. They do not know her tears taste of salt and iron. They do not know she still sees the color of dawn through the arrow slit, a sliver of gold against a sky that forgets nothing. And so the candle dwindles, the wind groans, the fortress endures. But in the stillness of her heart, a defiance glows, softer than flame yet harder than stone, the refusal to vanish. When the candle dies, darkness rushes in, wrapping her like a shroud. Yet even then, her whisper lingers, trembling through the stones. A whisper the walls cannot hold forever. For though she kneels forgotten in the fortress, the world beyond still stirs. Shadows gather in corridors. Voices plot, and the same envy that chained her will soon ignite fires that no fortress, no priest, no chain can contain. The chapter closes not in silence, but in the quiet promise that her suffering is but the first stone cast into waters yet to break into waves. The wind howls across battlements jagged as broken teeth, scattering crows that circle above the keep. Their cries pierce the gray sky, a chorus of scavengers waiting for the feast of despair. Below, The castle rises, dark and immovable, its towers like blackened fingers clawing against the heavens. Once, this fortress stood as a bulwark of sworn oaths and knightly vows. Now it shelters not defenders, but the defenseless souls caught in the snare of suspicion, fear, and power. Among them walks a pilgrim, wrongfully accused of theft while begging only for alms. His cloak hangs in tatters, its once humble brown stained by dust and rain. His sandals flap weakly with each step, leather thinned to near nothing by countless miles of holy journey. The staff that steadied his path has been stripped from him at the gate, cast aside as though faith itself had no weight here. The pilgrim's breath shivers into the cold air as guards drive him forward, iron-shod boots echoing like drums of judgment. Faded tapestries line the walls, their threads unraveling yet proud. Woven stories of battles won, of kings triumphant, of saints radiant in celestial light. Each tapestry mocks the pilgrim as he passes. Their heroes bear swords raised to heaven, yet here he stands unarmed, accused, and forsaken. The hall narrows, stone pressing closer, until the daylight above collapses into shadow. Beneath the fortress lies the dungeon, carved like an open wound into the earth. The door groans shut behind him, and the sound is final, as though the world itself has sealed him away. A rank stench clogs the air, rot, mold, and human misery, fermenting in the straw. Rats skitter through the corners, bold as lords, their eyes catching sparks of torchlight. Chains jangle with each breath, a music of captivity that drowns the memory of bells once heard on pilgrim roads. He is not alone. Shackled nearby is a boy, no more than 13, his wrists raw where iron rubs flesh. His crime is small, yet cruelly punished. The snaring of rabbits in a lord's wood, hunger named as theft. Across from him sits an old midwife, her hands still smelling faintly of herbs, dragged here under whispers of witchcraft. She gathered roots and flowers for healing, yet for that the charge of heresy clings to her like a shroud. Further down, a minstrel crouches in silence. His lute has been broken, his songs deemed dangerous because they dared to wound pride. He stares into the dark, lips moving in soundless verse, a melody stripped from the world. The pilgrim lowers himself against the wall, the cold stone biting his back. He closes his eyes. In the darkness of memory, holy shrines rise, places where weary travelers washed their feet in flowing springs, where bells tolled soft blessings upon dusty heads. He remembers incense curling through the air, the murmur of prayers lifting upward, and candles flickering against gilded icons. But here, in this pit, there are no bells, only the iron clatter of chains. He touches the wall beside him. Centuries of despair have worn grooves into the stone, each line a trace of countless hands that once reached in the same silence. He feels them, ghostly, enduring a fellowship of the condemned. His fingers linger as if pressing against the skin of time itself. He whispers a prayer, words fragile as cobwebs, yet steady. The boy listens, and the old midwife leans closer, their breath pausing in reverence. Above them, life continues. Lords feast at long tables, wine spilling, laughter thick as grease. Dogs bark in the courtyards, chasing scraps tossed from high windows. Music thrums in gilded halls, the clash of goblets, the scrape of knives. None hear the coughs below, the prayers whispered into straw, the lives withering like candles in wind. Yet the pilgrim feels something stirring in the silence, something stronger than despair. The dungeon does not echo absence. It hums with presence. These walls, dark and damp, have gathered sorrow until it has become sacred. The stone itself seems to breathe, each crack and seam a vessel of endurance. It is as though the earth remembers what men forget, that justice denied becomes a hymn of resistance. The boy's chains rattle softly as he shifts, and the pilgrim turns his head. "Does God hear us here?" the child whispers, his voice thin, more air than sound. The pilgrim answers not with certainty, but with a quiet conviction that trembles like fire on a wick. He hears most clearly in the darkness. The boy closes his eyes, clutching that frail promise like bread to an empty stomach. Time ceases its measure in such places. Days dissolve into nights, nights blur into days. Yet the pilgrim keeps whispering prayers, his voice weaving through the dungeon like thread through torn cloth. The midwife begins to murmur with him, ancient litanies of herbs and blessings, her tone cracked but steady. The minstrel, silent until now, hums low, a tune stripped of words but laden with grief. Together, their voices rise in fragments, forming not a hymn of triumph, but of survival. And so the dungeon becomes a cathedral. Its pillars are the heavy stones, its incense the rod of straw, its candles the glints of torchlight in rats' eyes. Each prayer is a bell, each breath a hymn. The pilgrim feels it deeply, that though their names will vanish, their suffering will not be lost. It gathers, invisible yet eternal, an unseen rebellion against silence. Above, the castle towers remain unmoved, but beneath, in the dark, a quiet fire smolders. It is not a fire that burns wood or flesh, but one that burns through despair itself. These are not only prisoners, they are witnesses. Their sorrow seeps into the bones of the fortress, into the very stones that will one day crumble. The pilgrim bows his head, lips moving without sound now, his final prayers rising like smoke no one can see. And as his eyes close, the silence shifts. It is no longer empty. It carries the weight of every soul cast into the shadows, each one singing their unheard song into eternity. The castle above may endure in stone, but in the dungeons below, it is memory that becomes unbreakable, memory carved not in banners or feasts, but in grooved stone and whispered prayers. And as the torches gutter low, the pilgrim breathes one last hymn into the dark, not of despair, but of endurance. For though chains may silence tongues, they cannot silence the eternal chorus of the human spirit. The wind moans across the battlements again, scattering the circling crows. Their wings beat against the sky as though answering a call, carrying upward what men would bury below. And in that rising silence, a question lingers. What becomes of a world that feasts above while innocence fades beneath? The answer waits in the next chamber of history, where shadow and judgment are not yet finished. The fortress stands against twilight like a beast refusing to die. Its towers rise from the river's edge, their silhouettes smeared across trembling water, black and broken, as if the castle itself were drowning in its reflection. Lanterns glow in high windows, but they are not lights of warmth. Only hollow flames, staring eyes in the skull of a decaying giant. The air tastes of iron and damp moss. Wind curls through the banners, frayed fabrics sighing like old lungs. Somewhere, a raven beats its wings and vanishes into the fog. Across the drawbridge, a boy is dragged. His arms are bound, rope cutting grooves into his wrists. He stumbles once, twice, knees striking timber, yet the guards do not slow. They haul him as one might haul refuse, a burden already condemned. The gate above groans open, the chains clattering like laughter from unseen demons. When it slams shut, the sound is not simply wood and iron. It is judgment, a final seal, as if heaven itself had closed its doors. The boy's name is not spoken, not by the guards, not by the onlookers hidden in shadowed alcoves, whispering like rats. To them he is no longer a mason's apprentice, no longer a pair of young hands that once lifted stone with reverence. He is accusation given flesh. He is blame made visible. His master lies beneath rubble, crushed by a collapse that the boy did not cause. But innocence is fragile in such halls, and guilt is easy mortar. It fills the cracks where truth cannot reach. He is led through corridors where time itself has gnawed the walls. Mortar crumbles at the edges. Ivy creeps in with a hunger more patient than any army. Once, these stones were lifted skyward with hope, shaped by men who believed fortresses could outlast grief, famine, fire. Now the fortress devours itself, its beauty drowned by rot. The boy feels each draft, each shiver of the stones, and wonders if they remember his touch. He had carried lime dust on his skin, had watched arches rise like prayers, had believed he was part of something eternal. That belief dies with every step deeper into shadow. The dungeon exhales damp earth. It reeks of things forgotten. The clang of chains sways against silence. Metal kissing stone with a rhythm that feels too deliberate, too watchful. The guards push him into a narrow cell, no larger than a grave left open. Torchlight flickers once across his face, then withdraws. The door slams. Darkness folds around him like a shroud. Alone, he presses his bound hands to the wall. His fingers trace the seams of stone, as if reading a scripture of betrayal. Each groove cuts him with memory. The weight of chisels, the rasp of files, the sound of hammers ringing like bells across scaffolds. He remembers bread, hot from the hearth, shared with his master after long hours. He remembers pride swelling in his chest as the skeleton of a cathedral took form, ribs of stone arching toward heaven. That pride is now a dagger. Every memory is a wound that bleeds inward. He sinks against the wall, rope-biting skin, and listens to the silence. But silence is not empty here. It is crowded. It breathes. The fortress carries the ghosts of those who entered and never left, their murmurs weaving with the draft that curls through cracks. Somewhere water drips, steady as a heartbeat. Somewhere a rat scratches, reminding him that life in its lowest form always survives. Hours dissolve, perhaps days. The boy counts them not by light, for there is none, but by hunger. His stomach knots, his lips split, his throat grows raw with thirst. He begins to hum, not to comfort himself, but to remember. A tune his mother once sang as she kneaded dough, soft as flour falling through fingers. The sound trembles, frail, fragile. It threads through the stones like smoke. For a moment the dungeon listens. For a moment even the fortress seems to pause. The melody falters. His voice cracks. He presses his forehead to the wall and lets the last note dissolve into silence. But the silence feels changed. No longer a tomb, but a listener. The song lingers, faint as dust, defiant as fire that refuses to die. And in that defiance, something survives. Outside, the river moves as though indifferent. Barges pass, heavy with grain and wool, their lanterns bobbing like small moons upon the black current. None who steer them know of the boy. None care. They feed cities, not prisoners. The river does not pause for one condemned soul. It carries on, eternal, carrying with it the weight of a world that builds, trades, forgets. Yet within the fortress, time curls differently. The boy dreams with his eyes open. He imagines stone bending, mortar whispering secrets, arches collapsing again and again, his master's cry buried beneath dust. He dreams of his own body rotting here, forgotten like countless others. But then he dreams of hands, his hands, chiseling once more, lifting stone not for prisons, but for bridges, for places where men might cross rather than be confined. His dreams swing between despair and longing, between the grave he inhabits and the sky he once touched. The dungeon is a place of endings, Yet within it he begins something else. Not freedom, not absolution, but defiance. Each breath he draws is rebellion. Each hum of his mother's song is a spark. The fortress, built to stand against all enemies, cannot silence memory, cannot kill song. And though the walls are thicker than any hope, they tremble, ever so faintly, with the rhythm of a boy who refuses to forget himself. Above, the lanterns in the high tower windows gutter in the wind. Their flames waver, thin and exhausted, as if echoing the breath of the prisoner below. A raven lands upon the battlement, head tilted, listening. The river keeps flowing. The barges keep drifting. Life continues. But somewhere, deep in the stone belly of the fortress, a melody refuses to die. And so the night ends not in silence, but in defiance. A song against chains, a whisper against centuries, a fragile bridge of sound stretching through darkness, daring to reach tomorrow. Snow falls in silence, a silence so heavy it smothers even the memory of birdsong. It drapes across the battlements, coating each stone tooth with a pale shroud, as though the castle itself were a skull left to weather beneath the sky. From afar, the fortress gleams white, crowned in purity. But purity is a lie. Beneath the snow, beneath the banners, beneath the laughter of men who believe themselves eternal, another truth festers. In the Lord's hall, the hearth snarls with fire. Shadows leap across carved beams, and the air is ripe with roasted meat and spiced wine. Goblets are raised, and voices thunder with tales of war and women, of plunder and pride. Dogs wrestle for scraps at their master's feet, their growls swallowed by the din. No one here feels the snow pressing in at the walls. No one here tastes the cold. But far below, carved into the belly of the bedrock, cold is sovereign. Cold that creeps into marrow, cold that makes the breath wheeze sharp as glass. Here the stones drip and the air stinks of mildew, of straw long rotted, of human fear pressed thin by time. The fire above may roar like a lion, but in these depths, silence prowls instead. Into this pit a boy is cast. 13 winters have shaped him, and no more. His hands are small, raw with the memory of reins and brushes, with the rhythm of tending horses before dawn. He knows the warmth of a horse's breath, the way it fogs in the winter air, how the smell of hay can feel like summer remembered. Yet now his hands grasp nothing but darkness. The cell swallows him whole. Straw clings to his boots, damp, alive with lice. His fingers graze the wall, slimy, slick, as though the stones themselves are sweating in fear. He shivers, not from the cold alone, but from the weight of eyes unseen, the eyes of stones that have outlived countless prisoners and will outlive him too. His crime? To carry words, scraps of parchment, bound in wax, passed from one hand to another with the innocence of duty. He was a page, nothing more. A boy whose honor was in obedience, whose pride lay in being swift and unseen. But suspicion is a fire that consumes truth before truth can speak. And so they branded him a spy. The door slammed, and with it, the last sound of mercy. Iron bars cut the air like scars, and beyond them no ear bends to hear him. In his sleeve he still clutches the thing that condemned him. The wax seal, its edge sharp against his skin. It remains unbroken, proof that he is no traitor, proof that he carried his master's trust untarnished. But proof is useless when no one will look. Above, laughter booms again. Men roar at a jest. A goblet tips, spilling red upon the rushes. Dogs bark and snap. Life strides on as though innocence were not strangled beneath their feet. The boy listens to this world as though through water. Muted, distorted, a reminder of what he has been cut from. And in that severance he remembers. The stables, where steam rose from horses' flanks at dawn. The way their coats gleamed when brushed beneath the shaft of light spilling through wooden slats. The sound of their hooves against earth, steady, loyal, alive. Those mornings were work, yes, but work wrapped in warmth, in belonging. He was part of something then, needed, trusted. Now only the rats need him. They scurry bold across his straw, their squeaks sharp as knives. He does not flinch. He listens, because the drip of water, the squeak of vermin, the hollow breath of silence. These are his company now. He speaks to none, save the wax seal he hides in his palm. He whispers to it as though it were a relic, a saint's bone, a holy truth uncorrupted. Do not betray me, he murmurs into the dark. Stay whole, stay unbroken. The seal gleams faintly, catching the torchlight that leaks once an hour when a guard passes by. In that brief glow it is a beacon, his fragment of honor, the last tether to a world that still had rules, still had trust. Without it, he is only another boy forgotten in stone. With it, he believes he might still be heard, if not by men, then by God. But time is cruel here. Time makes iron sweat. Time makes wax crumble. He knows this. He feels it each night as the snow presses heavier against the earth, as the silence folds tighter, as if even memory is being buried. And yet he clings, because to release the seal, to drop it, to let it vanish into straw and filth, would be to admit the dungeon has devoured him. The castle above endures, proud, towering, a monument of power. From its towers, banners flutter against the storm, shouting strength to the world. But below, in these stone lungs, breath falters. Below, innocence freezes into a husk, a relic no one will retrieve. The boy becomes part of the frost, part of the silence that binds every prisoner before and after him. Snow thickens in the night. It smothers the torches on the walls until only a dim glow survives. The village below huddles in smoke and hunger. Wolves pad the forest edge, their eyes mirrors of the void. The castle endures, its lord drunk on fire and feasting, blind to the weight of what rots beneath his feet. And the boy waits. He waits with the wax seal in his hand, whispering to it as though it were truth incarnate. He waits as though a door might open, as though innocence might still find a voice. He waits because waiting is all that remains. But silence sharpens here, honed by stone. Silence does not comfort, it cuts. Each hour it carves deeper, reminding him that truth unspoken is truth undone. That wax, like flesh, cannot resist forever. That innocence, when buried, is not preserved. It decays. Still he whispers. Still he clings. Until the seal is not merely wax. It becomes his relic, his scripture. His last prayer in a place where prayers rot faster than bodies. Above, life thunders on. Below, a boy kneels in straw and shadow, guarding a message no one will ever read. And in this image, the dungeon closes its grip. The snow continues to fall, deeper, heavier, unbroken. It buries the world in silence. A silence that does not end here. A silence that will reach farther, into the hall, into the village, into the hearts of those who believe stone and fire make them eternal. Because stone cracks, fire dies, and silence, once sown, only grows. The sun sinks into blood-red clouds, the sky burning as though it shares in the sins of the earth below. Across the fields, the shadow of the castle lengthens like a beast unfurling its limbs, swallowing the cottages of the peasants beneath its reach. Smoke curls from their hearths, thin and weary, as though even the fire trembles beneath the weight of stone and power. Once, that fortress was a sanctuary, a refuge against storms and raiders. Now it looms as a tomb for the living, its gates devouring the unlucky, its towers watching with silent accusation. Through those gates tonight passes a woman bound, her wrists torn raw by the rope, her body jolted by the uneven boards of the cart. She was once a healer, bending to the soil with reverence, her fingers stained green from the lifeblood of herbs. But to the lords, she is a danger cloaked in whispers, accused of weaving sickness into the world with her remedies. Her cures, once sought in desperation, are now twisted into curses by mouths hungry for blame. The villagers crowd the square as she is paraded before them, and fear turns their faces hard. They spit, they jeer, they hurl fragments of mud and straw, their hatred born not of knowledge but of terror. Terror of the unseen, the unknowable, the creeping hand of plague. Her head remains bowed, yet her memory wanders elsewhere. Though her hands are bound, they still remember the feel of rosemary between her fingers, the way sage crumbles like brittle parchment, the sharp sweetness of time lingering on her skin. In the midst of cries and curses, she breathes inward and finds, within herself, a garden still alive. The cart rattles to a halt before the castle. Its gate yawns like the mouth of some ancient creature, iron teeth glinting in the last light of dusk. The guards seize her, dragging her forward, their armor clattering like chains. They march her through corridors that smell of rust and damp earth, through halls where the torches sputter as if suffocated by the air. The walls are etched with centuries of sorrow, their stones cold with the memory of screams. At last they thrust her into a chamber with no fire, no warmth, no mercy. The walls glisten with salt, the slow bleeding of centuries of damp. The floor is uneven, carved by footsteps long erased, and the ceiling sags low, pressing down like the weight of an unseen hand. The guards sneer, their laughter sharp as blades, but soon their presence fades. Their boots echo away until only silence remains, thick and suffocating. She kneels in the dark, her breath shallow, the taste of iron heavy on her tongue. Yet her lips begin to move, shaping words not for ears of flesh but for the roots of memory. She whispers names of plants like prayers: lavender, valerian, yarrow, hyssop. Each syllable is a seed cast into the void, summoning visions of fields golden with summer light, gardens humming with bees, the tender hum of life woven into every stem. Her mind scatters these seeds across the barren floor. In the theater of her imagination, roots pierce the stone, vines climb the walls, blossoms break open in defiance of the dark. But reality presses in. The stone is unyielding. The air stinks of rot and stale breath. Somewhere far above, a chain clatters, or perhaps it is only the shifting of the fortress in its eternal sleep. She draws her knees close, pressing her forehead against them, her heartbeat loud enough to echo against the walls. The silence gnaws at her, whispering that she is forgotten. Yet she refuses. The castle may cage her flesh, but her spirit is no prisoner. With every breath, she conjures the phantom scent of time, of mint crushed beneath her palm, of lavender swaying in unseen breezes. She holds her invisible garden close, a defiance no stone can conquer. The hours stretch, the air thickens, shadows coil and uncoil like serpents. At times she believes she hears footsteps, voices murmuring beyond the wall, the distant weeping of another soul condemned. She cannot be certain. Perhaps it is only memory echoing too loudly in the emptiness. But she whispers again, low and steady, her voice breaking but unbroken. Rosemary, for remembrance, sage, for wisdom, chamomile, for sleep, rue, for sorrow. Each name is both a prayer and a spell, binding her to the earth beyond these walls. The dungeon swallows the sound, yet she knows her words live. Somewhere, above the stone, the wind stirs the fields. Somewhere, hands gather herbs for healing. Somewhere, seeds wait in silence for spring. Time drips like water from the ceiling, unmeasured, unmerciful. The torches outside gutter and die. Darkness becomes complete, a second skin against her eyelids. She cannot see her hands before her face, yet she feels them, bound, trembling, scarred. And still they remember. They remember grinding roots into powders, steeping leaves into bitter teas, pressing poultices against the burning skin of fevers. They remember life clinging against death. And so she endures. She breathes in silence, breathes out memory. The fortress can consume the body, but memory remains untamed. It grows like wildflowers in the cracks of stone, bright and stubborn, needing no sunlight to bloom. Her eyes close. She sees not the walls but fields, stretching unbroken. She sees not the dripping salt but dew shining on petals. She sees not the dungeon's chains but the curling tendrils of vines climbing ever higher. The castle cannot reach that place. And as the night deepens, she lies down upon the cold floor, her whispers fading to breath, her breath fading to silence. Yet even in silence her garden grows. Above, in the corridors of stone, a torch guttering in its sconce flickers and dies. The air is heavy, and the fortress groans with the weight of centuries. But in the darkness below, where the walls drip with salt and the air stinks of despair, the healer dreams of lavender, of time, of wildflowers daring to bloom where no light dares to reach. The dungeon sleeps, the castle waits, the night holds its breath. And tomorrow will bring the sound of footsteps descending once more.